There are so many adhesives on the market and everyone has their own preferences to the ones that they prefer to use. So I thought I would select a fairly broad range, which is this range that I've got here, and go through each one explaining what they are and what they do. So I'm going to go off camera, clear this area to give us some working room, and then when I come back, I'll go through each one of these with you. Now, before I begin, I just want to point out that before you buy or use any product, it's very important that you read the necessary safety data sheets, and these are generally available from the manufacturer's website. Now, if they aren't, then that would throw up some red flags with me. I would probably think that perhaps their product is quite toxic. Now, these data sheets are very easy to read and they're there for a reason, to protect your health so that you can take the necessary safety precautions. Now, we work in an industry, being the mosaic industry, and the products we use generally contain chemicals. So reading the necessary safety sheets will ensure we take the necessary safety precautions to protect our health. The first adhesive I'm going to talk about is E6000. Now, I have heard people say on social media, I use this all the time, it's my go-to adhesive and I use it every day. Well, this is not an adhesive I would use every day, nor would it be my go-to adhesive, because it is quite toxic. Yes, I have used this, but I've used it rarely. I probably use it 4 or 5 times a year. And if I'm going to use it, it's going to be because I've completed a mosaic and I'm going to adhere something on the surface like a piece of jewelry or something. So I'll use it very quickly, very sparingly, and then I may not use it for many months. Now, it does dry clear and it's a thick type of adhesive, so that it has some body to it, which can be quite a good thing depending on what you're going to be adhering. Now, it does adhere many types of different products. The setup time is around 10 minutes depending on the environment that it's in. Now, it's readily available for purchase through retail stores and online. It's waterproof, has a shelf life of 2 years unopened, and it's also chemical resistant. Now, it is quite toxic, as I mentioned earlier, so I definitely wouldn't use it for long periods of time, and I would only use it, when I really need to use it. It's not my go-to adhesive. Now, it does contain materials which may cause cancer, and risk of cancer depends on the duration and level of exposure. Now, it's not neutral curing, so I wouldn't use this for adhering mirror or rhinestones because it can affect the reflective backing. Now, it can be quite stringy, so that when you apply it and you go to pull away, it can be quite stringy. So what I generally do is I'll apply it and quickly pull it away, and that generally takes care of the stringiness. But if you find that you've got some stringiness over your piece that you're applying, then what I generally do is I leave it for about 24 hours, come back, and I can generally pull that stringiness off cleanly. So overall, it can be quite a useful adhesive, but you've just got to use it with some common sense and read those manufacturer safety data sheets before you do. Now, this is Sudol Fix-All Crystal Clear. Now, some people will pronounce the company name as Sudol and some people will pronounce it as Sudol. I don't know which one is the proper one, and sometimes I will use both. Now, this is an SMX polymer, and there are other brands that have their own polymers, but this SMX belongs to the Sudol range or Sudol range. Now, it doesn't contain solvents like silicons generally do, so there's no hazard labels or anything on the back there like the silicone tubes generally have. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't read the manufacturer safety data sheets, because it still contains chemicals. Now, it handles similar to silicone, as I mentioned, and it also cures clear. Now, it also cures fast and it has great adhesion to many different surfaces. It has a shelf life of generally 15 months unopened, and it has a good UV resistance. Now, I wouldn't use this in underwater situations because it's not suitable for it, so don't use it in things like bird baths. Now, it can be difficult to get the residue off the top of the tessera because it does handle like silicone. So people will generally use baby wipes to take that residue off or to help take that residue off. But Sudol do have their own wipes, which I would think would be stronger and probably better than baby wipes. So that's something maybe you could consider buying if you're looking at using the Sudol Fix-All Crystal Clear. Now this is one of my favourite glues in the marketplace. Now this is Mac Glue. It's made in the USA and I've been using it for a number of years and I really enjoy using it. Now it does dry clear and it was designed specifically for glass on glass but works with many other materials. Now it's not a PVA glue, even though it's white, it's not a PVA glue. It's quick drying even on glass on glass. Now in saying that though, if you're using larger pieces of glass to stick down or tessera, then that will slow the curing process down, so keep that in mind. Now it doesn't revert back to its original state when in contact with moisture, providing it's fully cured. It's non-toxic and you don't need much of it. The shelf life is technically 18 months, although I have used it, a year or two out of the shelf life and it's been fine. But that's the risk you take if you go beyond the 18 months. Now, it is more expensive, but you don't need much of it. You only need a little drop of it. So in the long run, I don't consider it to be expensive at all. Now, it's not readily available. It's sold online generally, although in the States, it's probably more readily available than what it is out here in Australia. Now, its best results keep it at room temperature. It cannot be dispatched if you're in a freeze-thaw country. It definitely cannot be dispatched in the freeze, because if it freezes, it will destroy the Mac glue. Now, before I use it, I like to make sure it's at room temperature. And I also like to make sure that my tessera and my substrate, if I'm doing a glass on glass, is also at room temperature, because I find that helps to cure it quicker and I find there's no issue with it. If you keep this in the cold and you use it in the cold, then the adhesive can crystallize. So you can adhere it down, but when you go out the next day, it will look like it's got little crystals around it. This has crystallized, which means that the actual bond will be compromised. So keep it at room temperature and you won't have any issues, but it's a great glue, in my opinion anyway. Now, Wellbond is a very popular glue in the mosaic industry, and I must say, whoever invented the name Wellbond, I hope they got a gold star, because I think Wellbond is such a great name for a glue. Now, it does dry clear and it's non-toxic, which makes it very, very popular with some mosaic artists. Now, it's available at most places for purchase, such as online stores and retailers, hardware stores, and it bonds to many different materials and it has a shelf life of 5 years, which I think is really awesome. Now, it's just a PVA glue. Now, it's not suitable for outside. Now, I know some people are out there going, oh, but I use Wellbond outside and it's really, really great. Well, that may be true, but unfortunately, Wellbond is moisture sensitive. So if it comes in contact with moisture or water, it will revert back to its original state. So if you've used it outside on an outside piece and you've sealed it and for some reason the moisture has gotten through to it, then it can destroy your mosaic, because this will revert back to its original state. So you are better off using adhesives that are going to be waterproof and be used in your mosaic, and that way you're going to be ensured of a good longevity of your mosaic. Now, it does revert back, as I said, to its original state. So if you're going to use it on something like a glass on glass, because I know it's quite popular in glass on glass, then once you use it, you have to wait for it to dry clear. Now, to dry, it requires air. It cures by air. So once it's cured, which can take a considerable amount of time, and you grout, the grout being moisture, is going to go in contact with the Wellbond and is going to make it revert back to its original state, which means it is going to now it can take months to cure, as mentioned, and it does cure by air, so you need to take those into consideration when you are using it for a glass on glass. Now, this particular glue here is a Sally's brand and it is a PVA glue. Now, this is also non-toxic, dries clear, adheres to different materials and is readily available, and it's also quite cheap to purchase. But again, once it comes in contact with moisture, it will revert back to its original state. So this one here is indoor only. So you need to take that in consideration when you're looking at purchasing glues and adhesives. Where is it going to be used? Is it going to come in contact with moisture? Because if it is, you really want a waterproof adhesive. Now, this one is Prep Multi-Use Adhesive, and this is an Australian product made in Australia, and it's available only here in Australia and also Northern Ireland, although you can purchase it, I think, on eBay and also Amazon. I know there have been people that have bought it in from Australia into the US, but how available it is in the US, I really couldn't tell you. Now, it is non-toxic and it does dry clear. It's water resistant, so don't confuse water resistant with waterproof because they are entirely different. Now, it is a good price point and it doesn't cure by air. Like I said, it's Australian made and it doesn't have a shelf life. It's unlimited shelf life. It's quick drying even on using glass on glass. But as I've mentioned earlier, if you're going to use glass pieces and they're larger pieces of glass that you're going to stick down onto a glass substrate, then it is going to take longer for it to cure. So just keep that in mind. Now, it bonds to many different materials and doesn't revert back to its original state. However, in saying that, it can't be used where water pools, so it's not suitable to be used in a bird bath. So it is water resistant, but it's not waterproof. Now, it's not, like I said, it's not available everywhere, but more retail outlets are now starting to carry it because it's starting to become more widely used in the mosaic industry. So keep that in mind because that's another good Australian product that I do like to use, that and Mac Glue for glass on glass and also for my indoor pieces as well. Now, this one here is by Sika and it's called Sika Seal Roof and Gutter Silicone Sealant. Now, on the back of it, you will notice that there's actually a warning label on here like most silicons, whereas on the Sudal or Sudal one, it didn't have those warning labels. Now, this is neutral curing, which means that it's going to be okay to use for your mirror, which means that the reflective backing on the mirror is not going to be affected. Now, it does have a low odour, but even with products with a low odour or no odour, that doesn't make them any less harmful. You still need to read the manufacturer's safety data sheets because I see comments from people and they go, oh, it doesn't have an odour, it's got to be better. No, that's not true. Not true at all. It can still not have an odour, but it can be as toxic as something that does have an odour. Now, this has a very good UV resistance and it also cures clear. Now, it has a shelf life of 12 months from the date of production and adheres to a wide range of substrates, which is really quite good. Now, like silicons, it can be difficult to get the residue off the top of the tessera if you get a bit of silicone on the top of your stained glass and trying to take it off, it leaves a residue. And of course, people do use baby wipes to help take off that residue. And like I said in the earlier Sudal one, the Sudal one does have their own wipes, which are going to be, I think, stronger to take that residue off than just ordinary baby wipes. Now, this is not suitable for being submerged. So that's what I say. It's very important to look at the safety data sheets and also the technical data sheets to make sure that it's going to be suitable for where you're going to be using a product. All these products, always advisable. Before I buy a product, I always read those safety data sheets and the technical data sheets to ensure that it's going to be suitable for the job I'm going to want to be using it on. So keep that in mind. Now, this one here is by Sally's and it's called the One Adhesive. And this uses their SIL-X advanced polymer. Now, if we roll the tube around to the back, we can see that it actually doesn't have any hazard symbols on it because it uses the polymer. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't any safety information that you don't need to follow, because there is, and you still need to read the manufacturer's safety data sheets. But because they use the polymer technology, it doesn't need to carry the actual hazard symbol. Now, this one is quite a strong bond on many different surfaces. It's interior or exterior applications. It's low VOCs, it's waterproof, it's UV resistant, and it's a low odour. But because it's got a low odour, or some products you may find may have a low odour, but that doesn't mean they're any less toxic. I know there's people out there that think, oh, because it's got a low odour, it's going to be less toxic than a product that has a very high odour. That's not the case. Not at all. So just keep that in mind. Now, if you are using this, you need to use it within 6 months of opening, and it's a grey colour. Now, I enjoy using this product because it is really, really good for using bulky or unusual shaped items. Anywhere where you need a bit of bulk in your adhesive, this works really well. I mean, you can use it in just laying down tessera as well. It can be flat tessera, but that's really where it comes into its own, is on bulky items. It's a sculpting compound and it has a putty-like consistency. Now, it adheres to most surfaces and it has the power of epoxy, which is extremely strong. Now, you can paint over it or use mica powders and it hardens like rock within 24 hours. It doesn't shrink and is waterproof, and you can even use it underwater. It's freeze-thaw stable and it adheres to itself even after curing. So if you've already adhered something down and let's say it's an hour into it, or maybe it's fully cured, you can mix up another batch of this and adhere straight to that one. So it works really well. It's a two-part product that you mix equal parts. So when I'm doing it, I generally eyeball it. You can use scales if you're a bit unsure about how accurate your eyes are going to be, but my eyes are pretty good. So I just mix part A up in one amount that I want, and then mix part B, the same size, and then I mix the two parts together. And I find it works really well mixing them together on a warm day, or once they've warmed up in your hands. But if it's in a cold environment, it's going to be a bit harder to mix them, but you can do it because it'll warm up in your hands, or if it's warm outside. I usually just hold it outside in the sun and just roll it around, wearing gloves at all times, and I find that works really well mixing them together. Now, speaking of gloves, you need to wear gloves while you're mixing, but I wear gloves at all times. I don't use those cheap disposable gloves. I pay a bit extra and get disposable gloves, but they've got a triple layer to them, and I find that works really well because your body can become sensitized to it over time, and that's why gloves are so important. You want to use a well-ventilated room, and I just always use gloves all the time, and my gloves even come up over my cuff of my jumper here because I really don't want to come in contact with it. Now, some people might say I'm overreacting here, but I'd prefer to overdo things rather than underdo it. Now, also, it can still feel sticky, but it may not adhere as good. So I find, for me, the magical turn-off time is around about the 20-minute mark. Now, you can use it for an hour, sculpting it and stuff, but I find when I'm adhering it, or when I'm adhering, say, beads down or bulky items, I find I mix small batches and I use it for about 20 minutes. And then after that, if I've got any left over, I will throw it away. So for argument's sake, if I've got let's say this butterfly, I'm adhering it down and I'm going to do more butterflies, and I've got a whole batch of epoxy sculpt down there. After 20 minutes, if I've still got some there, it will stiffen up, and I find I will scrape that all out and throw it away. That's why it's important to mix small batches. Well, that's what I do, and I find that works really, really well for me. Now, it's reasonably expensive to buy here in Australia, whereas in the US, because it's made in the US, it's going to be a lot cheaper. But it does go a long way, and I do find how I use it for certainly adhering bulky items and things where I need a bit of bulk to it, or I need to adhere on a vertical surface. I find this works really well, so it's worth paying that amount of money. But again, if you've got another adhesive and you don't need to use this and it's going to be cheaper, that's fine as well. Now, as I go, I wipe the tessera down with a damp rag, because when I'm using gloves, and even if you were to mix the two parts together using gloves and then you stopped using gloves, you still get residue on your fingers. I use gloves at all times, as I mentioned, so I'll have residue on the gloves, and because I'm handling the tessera, I will also get residue on those on the tops of the tessera. So I just get a damp rag and wipe it off as I go, and I find that works really well because you really don't want the residue to set 24 hours and then come back to it. Now, sanded grout, and I suppose this is the same with all grouts, I'm not quite sure, but definitely sanded grout does not adhere to epoxy sculpt. If you fill up your grout lines and there's only 1 mil in your grout lines for the grout, and you put your grout into that, that will wipe straight off from the epoxy sculpt. So keep your grout lines clear. And any excess, for instance, we'll go back to this butterfly again, any excess around your butterfly, don't come back to it in 24 hours. Scrape off that excess before you leave it, because if you come back and there's a bit of an excess around that butterfly, you won't be able to get rid of it because it cures like rock, because remember, it's got the power of epoxy. So what I tend to do is I tend to scrape around, if let's say I'm adhering that butterfly, I tend to scrape around that butterfly to get rid of any excess, put it back into the ball of epoxy sculpt if it's within the 20-minute mark, and then I can then use it to adhere more items. If I'm doing, there's a little bit down here, and I leave that, and I go and answer the phone, and I forget about it, and I come back in 24 hours, you're not going to remove that epoxy sculpt that's at the bottom of the butterfly. So clean up as you go, because it's going to save you heartache further down the track. Now this is Dunlop Tile Adhesive. Now this is their new packaging. So if you're going to go into Bunnings and you're looking for this, I don't know where else it's sold, but I got this from Bunnings. If you go into Bunnings, you need to look for this new container. Now up on screen now is a photo of the old packaging, but you're not going to probably be able to get that now. And if you notice on the old packaging, it says suitable for mosaics. But on the new packaging, there's no mention of that, because they've gone for a more tradie look rather than, I suppose, the homeowner. So for tradies, this is the look that they've gone for, and it's got here trade trusted. So I'm sure that's why they've used that particular, or this particular packaging. Now it's a cement-based adhesive, and you can tile over existing tiles, but you need to read the technical data sheet before you start doing that. And you should read the technical data sheet on all these products, as well as the manufacturer's safety data sheet. Now it's suitable for indoor and outdoor, and it's suitable for total submersion in water features and swimming pools, which is very, very good to know. It's a mixed adhesive, and it's suitable for 45 minutes working time. It's 2 parts, a powder and a liquid, and the shelf life is approximately 12 months, and it's a white colour. Now this is quite a popular adhesive that quite a few mosaic artists use. So you may want to consider this next time you're at Bunnings and having a look. If you're not happy about the adhesive you're already using, think about this one as well. But read those data sheets because they're going to be so important, so you make the right call on what adhesive you're going to be using. Now this one is Davco Ceramicrete. Now this is a cement-based adhesive, and you can use it indoor and outdoor. However, if you're going to be using this in submerged applications, you need to mix it with Davlastic. You can't mix this with water and use it in a submerged application. You have to mix the Davlastic into it. Now the colour varies from white to grey, as it's not colour controlled, and most cement-based adhesives are white or grey anyway. Now when it comes to overseas, cement-based adhesive is also known as thin set, because that's the American terminology. So when you're talking about thin set and cement-based adhesive, thin set is just the American terminology for cement-based adhesive. I just thought I'd point that out for our USA viewers, and also for those people in Australia that may not be aware of that. Now the colour varies from white to grey, as it's not colour controlled, but then most cement-based adhesives or thin sets are usually white or grey. But you can of course tint them. Now this will fully cure in 7 days. So this is another alternative if you're looking for a different branded product, and this is available through Bunnings as well here in Australia. Now when it comes to using a cement-based adhesive, I like to actually create my own. And how I do that is I use Ladder Creek Permacolor Grout and also Ladder Creek 4237 Admix. Now I find by combining these two together and not using any water, it will create a cement-based adhesive. Now the reason why I do this combination is because when I'm using this particular adhesive, a cement-based adhesive, it can get into your grout lines. And you have to be careful of that. But you don't have to be as careful if you use this combination, because your cement-based adhesive is going to be the same colour as what you're going to be grouting in. Now generally a cement-based adhesive is going to be a white or a greyish colour. And so if you get that into your grout lines, you're going to have to be very careful that you don't get too much into the grout lines, because if you grout in black or some other colour, that may actually come through. So you need to be careful of how much cement-based adhesive that you get into your grout lines. But by using this combination, you don't have to be as careful, because as I said before, you're going to be grouting in the same colour that your cement-based adhesive is going to be. Now, of course, if you don't like or want to do this combination, that's fine. I know there's people out there that are probably going, and grout is grout, and cement-based adhesive is cement-based adhesive, and you can't make cement-based adhesive out of grout. But this is what you use to do that. Now, this particular product has been around for decades. They have safety data sheets on it, they have technical data sheets on it, so it's pretty well proven. And I've been using it for a number of years and I haven't had any issues using this combination. But if you don't want to use this combination, that's fine, it's a personal choice. Up on screen now you'll see some off-the-shelf cement-based adhesives by Ladder Creek. But there are also other brands of cement-based adhesives if you want to use them. There's Dunlop, there is Mapai. There are quite a few other manufacturers that make cement-based adhesives. This is just what I prefer to use, but that doesn't mean it's the only way or the only one to use. Now, what's my preference of adhesives? This range here, and that also includes the Ladder Creek cement-based adhesive range as well, which is not showing here. Now, if I'm going to be creating an outdoor piece, generally I'll use one of the cement-based adhesives from the Ladder Creek range, whichever one suits my specific needs. Now, if I'm going to be wanting an adhesive and I'm going to be adhering something down that's an odd shape or a bit of an unusual shape, or I need something with a lot of body to it, or I'm creating something small and I'm going to be using beads and I don't want all the beads to go everywhere and slide everywhere, then I'll use Aves Epoxy Sculpt. If I'm going to be creating a glass on glass piece, then I'll generally use MAC or Prep Multi-Use Adhesive. Now, if I'm going to be creating an indoor piece and it's just like a general mosaic using different types of tessera, then I'll generally use MAC glue or Prep Multi-Use Adhesive for that. Now, if I'm going to be creating, let's say, on a vase, creating a mosaic on a vase or a container, and it's glass and it might have a bit of a concave to it, or I don't want the pieces to slide anywhere, then I will generally use Sudal Fix-All Crystal Clear. So it really does depend on what adhesive you want to use for the application. As long as it suits what you're using and the application, you'll be pretty well right. But again, read those technical data sheets and the manufacturer's safety data sheets. Don't just go by what people say, including myself. Always read those before you use a product or buy a product. So anyway, if you have any comments, put them down in the bottom of the comments section of the YouTube channel. You might have a specific adhesive you might want to use. Put it down in there. Write down what you use and the reasons why you use it, because I'll be interested in reading what you use, and I'm sure others will too. And also it might be one that I might want to use in the future as well. So anyway, put the comments down in the bottom of the comments section of the YouTube channel. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've taken something away from it, and I'll see you in the next one. Enjoy.